So, why do we do resettlement? There's a list on the slide there. Well, firstly, it recognises the uniqueness of service life. As you've heard from Dr. Castro and others today, serving in the military is like no other career. It's a family in itself. And in order to recognise that, we must look after our people when they transition out of the military at the end of their career, however long that might be. Secondly, the United Kingdom Ministry of Defence wishes to be an employer of first choice. We want school leavers and university leavers to come to us as a first choice, not a second, third or fourth choice of career. And to do that, making sure that we get the message across that we look after you when you leave the military at the end of your career, that is seen as a good attraction point to making us compete with all the other employers that are out there, and as an employer of first choice. Thirdly, we have, during the career in the military, we have a lot of in-service personal and professional development and training, building on career skills for your next promotion and so on and so forth. But more importantly, resettlement and transition should not be viewed as a standalone thing which happens to you at the end of service. Therefore, it's linked in very much to the inclusive part of that through career, personal and professional development. And you can think of it as the final stage in that. It also aids retention. People may choose to serve longer by not worrying about what's coming next because they know that there's a good package to support them whenever they choose to leave. Currently, although we've talked earlier about really support for veterans needs to be a needs-based system based on what an individual requires rather than a one-size-fits-all, we do very much in the UK still at the moment have a one-size-fits-all resettlement and transition process. It's based on your length of service rather than your rank. So in other words, a 3- or a 4-star general will have exactly the same entitlement as a private or a lance corporal, depending on the length of service that each of those people have. And finally, the philosophy is, in order to provide this support, then we provide employment and career support through paid time off work to do various activities. Funding, we throw an awful lot of money at this, and I'll give you an indication of that later, and also various training options and courses. So, how do we deliver this? Well, the absolute fundamentals are, we don't just pontificate from the Ministry of Defence in Whitehall. We actually have a policy. Joint Service Publication 534, I wrote that in my last job. The Tri-Service Resettlement and Employment Support Manual. That's the license, that's the authority for the Army, Navy and Air Force to deliver against all the mandated requirements for the resettlement and transition program. On the right-hand side of that slide, it shows a quick breakdown of how we deliver resettlement. So we've got what we call first line, which is unit-based, and second line support, which is support within each single service for resettlement advice and guidance. And then over on the right-hand side, we have the CTP, that's the Career Transition Partnership. They deliver what's called third-line support, which is the centralised resettlement and transition process for our service leavers at the end of career. That costs an awful lot of money. And in the centre there, we have the Ministry of Defence, which is the team I used to sit in. I've now moved to the Veterans and Transition team. And this is all governed and administered and delivered directly from the UK Ministry of Defence, who own the policy, and we own the contract that the Career Transition Partnership delivers the third-line resettlement support for. So that's the contractor that we have. It's called the Career Transition Partnership. It is a proper commercial contracting partnership between the Ministry of Defence in the UK and a commercial outplacement provider. The provider is not called the CTP. The CTP is a brand name used by the Ministry of Defence. It's a contractor called Right Management Limited. and they're military outplacement specialists and are part of the global Manpower group. Indeed, I believe Manpower also has offices here in Kyiv. I'm not 100% sure on that, but they're represented in something like 3,000 locations worldwide. So the Career Transition Partnership is the commercial entity provided by contract that provides all the third-line support, courses, briefings, advice, one-to-one career consultants, and hand-holding, if you like, as a service person leaves the military. This support is provided for 2 years before discharge and up to 2 years after discharge. Moving on to the next slide. That's a map, obviously, of the United Kingdom, and that shows the resettlement support infrastructure we have in place through the Career Transition Partnership. We have 10 regional resettlement centres, 9 actually based in the United Kingdom itself, and 1 based in Germany, because we still have a significant military presence in Germany, although that is withdrawing over the next few years. And we also provide a resettlement training centre where a large number of vocational training courses are conducted in Aldershot. So what do we have there? That's 11 touch points on the ground, if you like, in our footprint. And the holistic support that we provide is provided through those centres, and service leavers will come into those centres to receive appropriate guidance and training. This next slide, I'm not going to go through it in absolute detail, but to give you an idea of everything that we do within the Career Transition Partnership to support that transition out of the military. We provide one-to-one support, workshops, housing briefs, financial briefs. Remember, you get a lot of money, particularly if you're in receipt of a pension on discharge. And this sort of advice is to describe how you might want to save that money or use it wisely. Vocational training in a wide variety of disciplines. Some of these are delivered in-house, as I'll call it, through the Career Transition Partnership, but an awful lot are delivered by other commercial training providers, which you're allowed to spend the military money against. We provide a lot of employment support. We have online tools, career profiling tools to match you to certain skill sets. We have an online jobs database which only service leavers can access. And the Career Transition Partnership as an entity go out to employers and attract in these jobs. Many of these jobs, to be fair, are also available in the commercial advertising space where they're competing for civilians. But it's also true to say that some jobs are specifically being targeted for ex-service personnel, and that's where we will host those very specific jobs on our website. We also provide sector and employment fairs, where a number of employers will come to various regional fairs around the country and sell their wares, trying to attract a service leaver to come and work for them. And lastly, but not by least, we have one-to-one guidance. You have an allocated career consultant dedicated to you from the time you sign up to the program to 2 years after you've discharged, so ultimately up to 4 years. This next slide gives you an idea of the actual financial benefit that we're investing into every soldier, sailor, and airman that leaves. If you look at that slide in the center, that shows in round figures that a staff sergeant, a senior non-commissioned officer in the British military, will end up with about £19,000 worth. What's that? Say 25,000 US dollars worth, something like that, of investment in terms of the paid time off work, the amount of money that's available for various claims and allowances, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go through all the diagrams that are on the outside of that slide. It would take me too long to explain in turn, but the total investment is just sort of £20,000. This does not include the centralised operating cost of providing the Career Transition Partnership, which I can tell you costs the UK government about £10 million a year. So what's that? About 15 million US dollars year on year. Plus, of course, every single person that leaves has largely that package I've just described to you. just to give you an idea, about 15,000 people leave the UK military each year now as a steady state. Now, what I've described to you so far through the Career Transition Partnership is largely employment support in order to get you into a job. You've heard that having a job is extremely important, and other things then fall out of that. If you have a job, you can pay rent for a house to put a roof over your family's head, you can put food on the table for your family, and so on and so forth. That's why we have majored very heavily on the employment support factor. But we also do holistic transition. And this, we don't actually have a centralized policy for this. And my job over the next 9 months is to produce this holistic transition policy for the UK military. So transition is much more than just employment support. It covers all aspects of transition from military to civilian life at the end of service. Signing on with a doctor and a dentist in Civilian Street. Most military people, in the UK Armed Forces at least, will never have had done that. Getting your children into school, dealing with the National Health Service, making sure that your health concerns, if you have any, are dealt with and properly linked to in the National Health Service as you transition out of the military. Housing, debt management. If you have drug and alcohol dependencies, making sure that you get the appropriate links into treatment for that to make sure that you don't relapse and become a statistic. Also, it's quite clear, and I've talked about the through career development that we do with our personnel, but it's quite clear that we must prepare our personnel, and that goes for all of us, our military personnel, much earlier in their career in order to leave successfully and make a successful transition into civilian life. And we will be bringing an awful lot of this holistic transitional support much earlier on into career, and I'll describe in a moment how we're going to do that. Not also forgetting that families transition too. Families are an extremely important part of the transition process. And currently, we have a model running with the British Army, which we will be adopting into centralised policy, called the hard facts mnemonic, which I'll come to on the next slide. And this is my last slide. And this mnemonic covers all the things which we need to cover and make sure are covered off, that people have answers for in order to make a successful transition, and quickly running through them. Health, both mental and physical. Accommodation, what are you going to do for your future housing needs? Relocation, which part of the country are you going to move to? Are you going to move abroad? What have you done about it? Have you applied for visas? And so on and so forth. Drugs and alcohol, not do you want drugs and alcohol, but have you got issues with them? Therefore, we need to sort that out, or make sure you keep running with your rehabilitation program. Finance. Yes, you're going to have a lot of money when you leave if you're in receipt of an immediate pension, but equally, do you have debt issues? Budgeting. Remember, the military looks after you. You've got to budget and account for things all on your own. Attitude. Do you have the right mindset to transition successfully? You have to have a civilian mindset, not a military mindset. Children and family. Looking after your family, making sure that the family fully understand what's going on and can help you make those decisions and support. Children, what are you going to do about their health needs, their schooling and so on and so forth. Training, what skill sets are you going to develop or rehone or completely rehash in order to find a second career as you transition out of the military. And finally, linking you with the appropriate support agencies that you will need. So you can see that that covers a whole spectrum of things. And what we're currently doing with the British Army at the moment is this mnemonic, all these things that I've mentioned are covered off annually at the same time as a soldier will have their sort of annual appraisal. There's a checklist that we check with each soldier what they're doing in all of these areas. So that's called hard facts monitoring. When the soldier leaves the army, we then get, just before discharge, or about 6 months before discharge, we then go on to hard facts assessment, and we do a thorough assessment on where they are in that loop. And if they haven't thought about things very well, quite often we find that they decide to serve for a little bit longer. I'll give you an example. If a soldier has a £15,000 debt, which some of our soldiers do, and he decides to leave in the next 6 months, he will still go into Civvy Street with a large debt. He won't be able to afford to rent a house for his family, or himself if he's single, and so on and so forth. Quite often these discussions during the hard facts assessment result in that soldier working out for himself or herself that they indeed have a problem, and that if they serve in the military for another 18 months, they can actually save properly, and through their sergeant major they'll get counselling and so on and so forth, and they can remove that debt. So they have no debt when they go into Civvy Street, and maybe even some savings. So this is not a retention tool per se, but in some units in the British military, applying this about a few months prior to discharge has resulted in half of those people deciding to leave. Instead, they turned around and said, I'm going to serve on for another 18 months so I can clear my debt and really get a grip of what I'm going to do for my housing needs for me and my family. That's all I've got at the moment, but I'm prepared to take questions, obviously, after everyone's spoken. Thank you very much.